Winter is upon us, which can only mean one thing. XXL hoodies, irresponsible overeating, trying to be like our favorite enhanced bodybuilder, and a fun but extremely messy 3-month period of weight gain with little muscle to show at the end, coupled with a hefty dose of body dysmorphia and a few weeks of feeling like you've gotten fat and completely ruined your physique. Sound familiar? Well, in this video we'll break down how to properly bulk for muscle gain, looking at whether bulking is actually necessary, and obviously the pros and cons of more conservative and aggressive approaches. Additionally, we'll also touch on the million-dollar question of how long you should bulk for, which, if you've been following the channel, I've answered quite a few times already. We will also look at common misconceptions around training for muscle gain and what's the best training approach if you want to make sure that you're leaving no stone unturned in your mass gaining journey. But let's start with whether bulking is even necessary in the first place. See, over the years, you've probably heard it all. From eat big to get big and bodybuilders looking like overinflated balloons to people telling you that bulking is completely unnecessary and that just maintaining your weight is all you need to maximize gains. But instead of listening to our favorite influencer, let's briefly look at what the science says. In 2019, Slater et al. Published a review called "Is an Energy Surplus Required to Maximize Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy Associated with Resistance Training?" They essentially reviewed the surprisingly small body of evidence and came to a relatively balanced take. An energy surplus isn't strictly required to gain muscle. Hypertrophy can occur even in energy balance and in some cases even in a deficit, especially in people who are not trained or overweight/obese. As I touched on my video on body recomposition, previous studies have shown that populations like these can gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously, particularly when they're training hard and consuming a ton of protein. That said, the Slater paper mentioned that a surplus can potentially help, especially in well-trained individuals, to enhance gains in fat-free mass. However, the trade-offs are that you will also see some increases in fat mass as well. They also mentioned that there is speculation that a calorie surplus could potentially amplify the anabolic response to training, though that's not fully proven. While resistance training alone is a powerful stimulus for muscle protein synthesis, being in a deficit can blunt that response by reducing muscle protein synthesis by up to 30%. That said, we don't have concrete evidence that overfeeding will further enhance muscle protein synthesis in response to protein ingestion or training. In other words, the extra calories do not seem to supercharge the protein synthesis response, at least not directly, based on the little evidence we have now. So overall, the benefits of being in a surplus may stem more from enabling consistent training, recovery, and the overall anabolic environment rather than ramping up muscle protein synthesis itself. Additionally, although we don't currently have the best idea for what a clear or fixed energy cost for building a kilo or 2 pounds of muscle is, it does seem to require some energy, given the energetic cost of repair, remodeling, signaling, and supporting new tissue metabolically. Based on this, Slater argued that starting with a modest energy surplus of around 300 to 400 calories per day, especially in trained individuals, and then monitoring progress via body composition and performance to adjust accordingly, makes sense to maximize muscle gain. If we then look at studies that have explored bulking directly, like the somewhat classic study by Helms et al., we see that when they put trained lifters on the same 8-week full body program but split calories into 3 targets, 15% surplus, 5% surplus, or maintenance, muscle thickness changed similarly across quads, triceps, and most sides regardless of the surplus. The only consistently growing side was the biceps, the muscle that also got the highest volume and closer to failure work overall. However, there was only weak evidence that gaining more body mass modestly helped the biceps grow more in compared to other muscles, and body mass gain did not really predict growth. Practically, the bigger the surplus, the more fat the participants put on, with no real extra muscle to show for it. However, we're talking about trained participants on a 3 days per week training plan. The biceps likely grew more because they got the most sets and were pushed the hardest. Other muscles trained with less volume and overall intensity of effort. Keep that point in mind, as it is something I want to touch on later, and it's something that I think most people overlook when bulking. So overall, based on the findings of the study, the authors also recommended to aim for a conservative bulk where you only gain roughly 0.25 to 0.5% of your body weight per week, and keeping that surplus lower based on how advanced you are as a lifter. So the more advanced you were, the less of a surplus they recommended. This is also something to keep in mind, since previous data in untrained individuals that were bulking has shown that they can potentially gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously, even while on a somewhat aggressive surplus. But overall, unfortunately, we do not have a crystal clear answer on whether bulking is actually necessary to maximize gains, whether it's only going to be potent for beginners, and whether the effects of the surplus scale with the amount and intensity of training that you're doing. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done, but that doesn't mean that we can't rely on the current evidence to have some sense of direction. After all, that's how science works. Overall, the literature does somewhat debunk the whole eat big to get big propaganda many of us, including myself, fell for, suggesting that a conservative surplus is likely the way to go for most people, at least until we have a ton more data. But wait a second, ex-fatso, now ab extraordinaire, real doctor, PhD doctorate holder, bold by choice DRPAK, I see you typing. Have you not said that muscle building is possible even on maintenance calories, like on that previous video you made about gaining muscle and losing fat at the same time, which I recommend you watch if you haven't watched already? Well, dear based viewer, yes, I have said that before, but here's the thing. We, lifters, and that includes you, new to the gym wanting to get jacked lifter, we do this lifting thing as a hobby and because we enjoy it. We spend a lot of time training, learning about nutrition, spend money on high protein foods, and overall have gains as a relatively high priority in our lives. This means that we're comfortable with making educated bets for them their sweet gains. In the case of maximizing gains, a conservative surplus combined with a high protein diet and a properly structured lifting plan, which I'll discuss later, provides the peace of mind that you're leaving no stone unturned in your muscle gain efforts. The last thing you want, especially if you're aiming for substantial gains, is to spend money and time and months trying to maintain your weight and at the end feel like you've wasted all that time. Sure, by conservatively bulking, you will gain a bit of fat along the way, but it should be relatively easy to lose with a couple of months of relatively chill diet. If it gives you any peace of mind, conservative bulking is something that a ton of high-level natural bodybuilders still do, if not all of them. They keep things tidy, stay relatively lean, but still make a consistent and conscious effort to gain some body weight over long periods of time to maximize gains. Take this with a grain of salt, but as I said, we do have some evidence for bulking offering some benefits for muscle growth, although we're far from a super clear answer yet. Shocking, I know. But let's break it down by training status. If you're a beginner to lifting, it's possible that even more aggressive surpluses at roughly 0.5% of your body weight gain per week may have something to offer. If you're an advanced trainee, lifting for over 10 years consistently, it's likely that staying closer to 0.20% of body weight gain per week is a solid way to ensure you're maximizing muscle gain while also minimizing fat gain. If you're a lifetime intermediate, well, you're a lifetime intermediate, so you ain't making no gains. Just kidding, staying somewhere in the 0.20 to 0.35% range probably makes sense, but there are a few factors that should dictate how aggressively you bulk. Namely, and this goes for all training statuses, your waist circumference. If your current waist circumference is above half of your height, i.e. having a ratio above 0.5, I'd recommend you keep things relatively conservative, if not consider cutting a bit first. This is mainly because you don't want your visceral fat, the fat around your organs, to be high. Waist to height ratio is an excellent and very easy to use tool to make sure that your midsection is in check from a health perspective. If it does end being higher than 0.5 during your bulk, it's not a huge deal, but if you're already above the cutoff point, I wouldn't be comfortable recommending you gain much more body weight. In general, this is a good overall cutoff point to use besides your appearance, which brings me to the next factor. Your current happiness with your physique should also play a role in how aggressively you bulk. I know body dysmorphia is a thing, but if you're at a stage in your lifting career where you're constantly worried about whether you're looking fat or not, going for an aggressive surplus just for that little dopamine spike and XXL hoodies winter arc post will likely backfire pretty quick. You will likely bring the bulk to an end very quick and not feel that great about yourself. If, however, you're relatively lean and pretty comfortable with yourself, you could push things a tiny bit more aggressively, going closer to 0.5% of weight gain per week, especially if you're somewhat new to the gym. Overall though, and this is where I think most people mess up, is that you need to set yourself up for success for a long-term bulk. The whole 3-month winter bulk sounds like a fun way to eat like a maniac for 3 months while looking bigger in clothes, but as a natural lifter, committing to at least 6 months of consistent weight gain and hard training is the way to go. Muscle growth takes time, especially substantial muscle growth, which will make you visibly bigger. After all, that's why you're watching this video. You want to look and obviously be more muscular, but I doubt many of you would be happy with an ultrasound measurement showing that you've gained a substantial amount of muscle thickness if that is not reflected in the mirror. I'd recommend you have check-in points every 3 months to G-check whether you're bulking too aggressively or too conservatively and adjust as needed. Ideally, track your body weight daily so you can compare weekly averages, your gym performance so you can make sure you're hitting this across multiple lifts and rep ranges, your waist, thigh, chest and arm circumference, and also your body composition by flexed and relaxed pictures under similar conditions, lighting, time of day, etc. No, the picture at the anabolic light at your gym with a pump after a meal high in salt doesn't count as a progress pic when you compare it to a screenshot from a video of you from a social gathering a few months ago. Anyways though, triangulating all the above will give you a solid idea of whether you're making good progress or not. In general, if your body weight is trending up, general circumference measurements are up, with your waist staying pretty tidy, and you're absolutely killing it in the gym, you can feel confident that good things are happening. As I've said before, calculate your maintenance calories using the calculator in the description of the video, track your body weight for 2 to 3 weeks while consuming your predicted maintenance calories, and then take it from there. Keep in mind that these calculators are not perfect and will give you a rough estimate of your maintenance calories. The calculator I've linked also gives you the ability to enter your own values, as well as tell it how much of body weight you want to gain per week to predict your bulking calories. Otherwise, if you already roughly know your maintenance calories, multiply your current weight in pounds or kg by your desired gain per week. For example, 0.0020 for me, as I go for 0.20% of my body weight gain per week. Then multiply that number by 3,500, the approximate calories in a pound, to get your weekly calorie surplus. Divide that by 7 to find how many extra calories you should eat per day above your maintenance. We used 3,500 calories as a rough estimate because it approximates the energy needed to gain a pound of body mass, typically fat. And while muscle gain involves different processes, this number provides a practical starting point for calculating a surplus, which you can then adjust based on how your weight changes over time. This also roughly corresponds to the usual recommendations of eating roughly 5 to 10% above maintenance calories for a lean bulk. You could approach it that way too. If you know your maintenance calories, consume roughly 5 to 10% over that for a pretty conservative bulk, or 10 to 15% for a more aggressive yet somewhat tidy bulk. But what about dirty bulking, Dr. Pak? Isn't that what got you all your gains? The truth is that although I have dirty bulked in the past, gaining 40 pounds in 4 months, I didn't actually dirty bulk since you got to know me from YouTube. I was just fatter to begin with and kept gaining weight for a significant period of time. I did make sure to track visceral fat, health markers, blah 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 throughout all that period, and was comfortable with being chunkier, as well as did a few mini cuts along the way. Although a slightly more aggressive bulk can be great for those looking to maximize gains and maybe natural skinny or comfier with being fluffier, a true dirty bulk is rarely a good idea. A dirty bulk is not the same as bear mode. A dirty bulk, at least that's how I know it, is where you eat big to get big, old school style, eating everything in sight and gaining as much weight as you can while training like a maniac. Sounds good on paper, but it will most definitely lead to you getting fat very quickly and having to diet for a while to get the fat off. Avoid it. On to macros. Things here are extremely simple. I recommend setting protein at roughly 2 grams per kilogram of body weight or 0.9 grams per pound. This is a super solid general maximization approach. However, and to directly quote friend Greg Knuckles, who recently wrote a monster article including a new analysis on the protein literature, if you're a man wanting to take a better safe than sorry approach to protein intake, aiming for 2.35 grams per kilogram of body weight or 1.07 grams per pound should do the trick. That should maximize muscle growth in the vast majority of individuals. Additionally, if you have a preference for lower protein intakes, aim for 1.2 to 1.5 grams per kilo or 0.5 to 0.7 grams per pound. This should cover most of your basic rocks, blah 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 blah. Yeah, nice try, Greg, stealing people's gains with your solid and inclusive takes. Joking aside though, I'd recommend that you do your best to hit the 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight per day every day, but don't lose your mind if you don't here and there. Training is the stimulus for muscle growth and should be what you prioritize. As far as carbs and fats go, just make sure to hit roughly 0.7 grams per fat per kilo of body weight every day, ideally from healthy sources like olive oil, fatty fish, nuts, etc. And do your best to consume 25 to 40 grams of fiber per day, consuming plenty of fruits and vegetables. Consume whatever other carb sources you want. want. As long as you're doing your best to hit your calorie, protein, and fiber targets while mostly eating whole foods, you can be super flexible and not even really track everything else. Don't buy into BS supplements like testosterone that have zero scientific evidence supporting their effectiveness, and instead opt for creatine monohydrate and a protein powder. The latter is more optional than the former, although you don't need to buy it either. Creatine is something that I do recommend though, as it's a pretty solid supplement as far as over-the-counter supplements are concerned. And now, on to training. At this point, allow me to plug our app, MyAdapt. If you want to maximize muscle growth while bulking and you don't want to think about your training whatsoever, consider giving MyAdapt a go. MyAdapt is like a coach in your pocket. It will plan your training, prioritize muscles you want to specialize on, and adapt based on you. It's extremely versatile and will cover your needs regardless of your experience, training environment, or lifestyle. Try it for 2 weeks for free using code DRPAK, and it's available on myadapt.com and the Apple and Google Play app stores. Additionally, you can work with me directly if you like. Go to drpak.com to book a free intro call. But back to me yapping about training when bulking. This is where I feel people don't do their true due diligence. I often see people going very hard on the food pirating stuff. They've likely heard from enhanced bodybuilders showing off that they did not miss a meal, but then proceed to do a handful of sets per muscle group per week because that's what their favorite bodybuilders said it's optimal, and explain it using some random analogy. Here's the somewhat sad reality, folks. And mind you, this is coming from Dr. Minimum Effective Dose, Mr. You can make amazing gains with a handful of sets per week, Lord Just Do Something, Archbishop of Low Volume Time Efficient Training. The totality of current scientific evidence, including one of the most prolific papers ever on training volume, heavily support that more training volume will lead to more muscle growth. When you are on your bulking journey, the educated bet I mentioned, don't fall in the trap of going low volume. Sure, if you're pressed for time or insert random edge case here, then hitting the gym for as long as you can is good enough. But if you have more time to do more, then do more. Which brings me to another misunderstood part about volume and hypertrophy. More volume equals more growth, but in practice, in the gym, in the trenches, the idea is that you do as much as you can while also recovering. Not to take general recommendations, aim for the top end for all muscle groups and do it for a couple of weeks until you're unable to walk. So here are my volume recommendations for a natural trainee who is on a relatively conservative bulk trying to maximize muscle growth. A minimum of 10 sets per muscle group per week. Ideally, 15 to 25 sets per muscle group per week. And for the muscle groups that you really care about and you want to prioritize, 20 to 30 sets per muscle group per week. When I say sets per muscle group per week, I mean fractional sets. For example, when doing a dumbbell incline press, you'd count it as 1 set for your chest and half a set for your triceps and front delts. All those sets performed ideally in the 0 to 2 reps in reserve range. The big disclaimer though, if you see that even for smaller muscle groups, more volume means that your performance continuously suffers, you have joint pains, and overall things feel horrible, keep volume to the highest point you can, where you can maintain that for a while. However, this is where you must also keep in mind that training to maximize gains will be hard and will also come with a few sessions where you have to push yourself mentally. As long as your performance in the gym is trending up, you're good, even if you're feeling fatigued. That said though, if you're comfortable with just making top gains and don't really care to spend the extra time and effort being in the gym, if you are somewhere in the 10 to 20 fractional sets per muscle per week, you're fine. Additionally, always remember that even when life gets in the way, as little as 4 sets per muscle group per week will still contribute to growth. That said, consider using agonist-antagonist supersets and drop sets to get more training volume in if you're pressed for time. The former is a great way to do more in much less time without sacrificing gains. Select exercises where you can easily switch from one to the other without having to hog a bunch of different equipment. For example, use cables, dumbbells, or just buy your own gym. And ideally hit every muscle 2 to 3 times per week so you can distribute training volume in a way that makes each session the most productive. Keep 10 sets per muscle group as a rough volume cap for each training session, as recent evidence has shown that that's where diminishing returns start to occur as it pertains to session volume. A few good splits to consider when doing so are upper-lower, push-pull legs, upper-lower, the traditional push-pull legs, a modified 3 to 5 times per week full body, or just let MyAdapt handle all that for you. Keep most of your sets in the 5 to 12 rep range, but also include a few higher rep sets at the 10 to 20 rep range to ensure that you're leaving no stone unturned. Rest Rest for about 1.5 minutes between each set, but if you need to rest longer, feel free to do so. Research shows that this will likely not give you more gains, but I get that some of you may need a bit more time between some exercises. I'd also recommend performing some of your sets as lengthened partials, or at the very least, placing emphasis on the stretch by pausing in the stretch position. You don't need to take the piss with it, as we say in the UK, but don't let me catch you half repping stuff in the shortened position. Lastly, we recently published the most up-to-date meta-analysis on tempo, and specifically looking at the effect of concentric and eccentric tempo on muscle growth. It turns out that you don't need to overly control the eccentric or do anything crazy with your rep speed. Have some eccentric control, lift the weight explosively, and you are covered. As far as cardio goes, do as you wish. But if you're training the way I've recommended with all that volume while hitting 8 to 10,000 steps per day, you'll be more than covered from a health perspective. And that's it. Everything you need to know about bulking. Bulk for a while, gain some, not a ton of body weight, train super hard, and of course, make sure that you're sleeping 7 to 9 hours per day at roughly the same time. Enjoy your gains, and thank you for watching. MyAdapt.com for the smartest coach in your pocket, DRPAK.com for the handsomest coach in your pocket, and code DRPAK for 10% off Rascal Apparel, the best lifting clothes in the game. Peace!